was very last minute, and I appreciate you coming through and putting it together. Oh, I'm standing in front of the projector. As you can see behind me, we have a trigger warning. Okay, this presentation will contain words like Jesus and God. So, if you have any allergies to that, please know where the exits are at all times. All right, because we're going to do some praise. All right, so my name, like Gigi said, is Farrah Prudence. Farrah is actually my birth name. It's my real name. I use Prudence to make sure that my identity stays safe because there have been threats against my family. And this is my story. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?" I can't tell you how important this verse is in my life, because my mother made a decision decades ago that till this day affects my life because she did not follow this verse. We have a movement going on right now in the United States and Canada and around the world. It's called the Interfaith Movement. This movement would like us to believe that all religions are good, that in fact the three so-called Abrahamic religions all worship the same God. Now this idea has been perpetuated for a very long time. And because of ideas similar to this, and because of not being familiar with the Bible, my mother, who was born and raised Rum Orthodox, married a Muslim man. And I was one of their children, 5 children to be exact. So how many of you have heard of the Rum Orthodox Church? Okay, 1. That's not bad. Usually there's nobody. The Rum Orthodox Church is actually one of the earliest churches that was established by both St. Peter and St. Paul. The reason you haven't heard of them is because they were nearly exterminated by the first invasion of Islam into the Holy Land.
Rum. R-A-M?
R-U-M. Rum Orthodox. They serve wine for communion, not rum. It's not that kind of rum. All right. So my mother got into this marriage with the pretense from my father, believing that the children will be raised on both religions, that they were going to celebrate Christmas and celebrate the Islamic Eid. Okay? It was all forbidden romance and love until the children started to come along. They actually got married in a church and got married in a mosque. So, kid number 1, kid number 2, by the time my mom was pregnant with number 3, the story had changed completely. There were no crosses allowed in the house. She was not allowed to pray in front of the kids. She's not allowed to use the names of her family members in front of the kids because they're Christian names. She was big pregnant when on November 1st, my dad told her that if she does not convert to Islam, then he is going to take the kids back to the Middle East and leave her behind. In an effort to keep the peace in the family, she went to a mosque and converted to Islam. Well, unfortunately, that didn't bring peace into the family. In fact, looking back at my timeline of my life, I believe that that is the very moment that my mother signed us out of grace, officially, is by denying Christ and by becoming a Muslim. So, this is me as a child. Okay, y'all go, aww. Yeah. You guys, stop. All right, so as I was a 6-year-old when my dad decided to move us to Jordan. Jordan is what is known as a moderately Islamic country. That's what the media likes to sell it as these days. And I can tell you that in a moderately Islamic country, my family literally lived in hell. Because even moderate Islamic countries follow Islamic law. All right? So some of the things that we learned very quickly is that I was no longer a person with opinions. I was somebody's property, namely my father's property. I no longer had the freedoms that I enjoyed as a child in the United States. I no longer had a voice. I no longer had rights. My mother learned very quickly that converting into Islam, wearing the hijab, praying 5 times a day, doing all of the things that were necessary to be considered a Muslim woman also didn't protect her. Because on the first day of Ramadan, as my mom will tell you in her book, Frozen Tears, on the first day of Ramadan, my dad hit her pretty badly. Her face was bloodied and bruised, and this was a problem. Because in Islam, and I grew up in Sunni Islam, which over 85% of Muslims around the world belong to Sunni Islam. So you can say it's mainstream Islam. In Sunni Islam, you are not allowed to beat your wife on the face. You're not supposed to leave marks on the face. Everywhere else is okay. So my mom said, for sure this time, I'm going to get justice. She takes herself to the sheikh. The sheikh is what people like to equate as a pastor, but it's not. He's not just a religious leader. The sheikh also has political power. He has civil powers. He can put people in jail. He can do divorces, marriages. It doesn't have to be authorized by the state. The sheikh is the state. Okay? So she goes to the sheikh and she says, "Yeah, sheikh, look at what he's done to my face." He's furious. Okay? He tells his guard to go grab him, and if he doesn't want to come, drag him by the ear. Okay? He means business. So the guard goes and gets my dad. The sheikh says, "Have you no fear of Allah? How could you do this to your wife on the first day of Ramadan?" My dad said, "Yes, sheikh. She's a Christian convert, and she cursed Allah on the first day, and I lost it." And that was it, folks. That was a wrap. The sheikh told my mother to go home. There's nothing I could do for you. That was a quick lesson in Islamic justice. You see, Islam likes to sell this idea that Islam karram al-mar'a, which means Islam honored the woman. But the truth is that Islam has the biggest jail, the biggest slavery known to mankind till this day on women and womanhood. So, not only did all 5 of us kids and my mother endure much physical, verbal, and emotional abuse. Of course, my mother also endured spiritual abuse because she wasn't allowed to speak about her Christianity at all. As a matter of fact, she had a cross removed. She had a cross tattoo that was forcefully removed off her hand to make sure that nobody ever knew that she was ever a Christian. Not only that, but as a matter of fact, I learned very quickly that as the daughter of a Christian convert, I don't even own my body, because my dad's brother and my dad's maternal uncle helped themselves to whatever they wanted with me as a child between the time I was about 7 till the time I was about 12 years old. When I told my dad about what was going on in intimate detail, he said, "Okay," and he left the room. His mother, my grandmother, I remember going outside, sitting in the garden. As you can imagine, I think I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I was shaking, just telling my dad all of this information. It's just brutal for me. My grandmother comes out and says, "You're the daughter of a street woman." That's a reference to a Christian woman. "We don't do that in our families. You do that in your families." See, it didn't matter that my mother converted. It didn't matter that I was an innocent child. All that mattered was that I came from what my dad and his family always referred to as a filthy womb. So that was a mark that was constantly on us as children. When I was about 10 years old, I decided that I was going to earn my father's love, because any 10-year-old wants to earn their parents' love. And so the only way that as a woman I can do that, because at 10 years old in the Middle East, you're a woman, okay? The only way for a Muslim woman or a Muslim girl to get any kind of respect is to become a devout Muslim. And that's what I was going to do. And I can tell you right now that my father was not a devout Muslim. He is, what the media will tell you today, is a moderate Muslim. In fact, a non-practicing Muslim, a westernized Muslim. All right? I don't remember ever my father opening the Quran at home. I don't remember that. I can't remember a single time. I can't remember more than once or twice that he's ever prayed in front of me. He went to the mosque maybe on Eid, which is their holiday. It's kind of like the Christians that go to church on Christmas and Easter. You wouldn't know any of those Christians, would you? No. So that's the kind of Muslims they were. My aunts did not wear the hijab when I was growing up. As a matter of fact, when I was 10 years old, decided I was going to become devout. I decided I was going to start wearing the hijab. They all laughed at me. I started taking bets on when I was going to take it off. It's not a big problem. It's not a big deal to them at all. So I started wearing the hijab. That's the headscarf. And then I started to pray 5 times a day. I started to study the Quran, which is what Muslims believe is the literal word of Allah, of their God. It is not like the Bible where we believe it is inspired by God. It is letter for letter what Allah told Muhammad through the Archangel Gabriel. That's what they believe. Then I started studying what is called the Sunnah and the Sirah. So because I'm going to be referring to those, I'm just going to explain them real quick to you. The Sunnah is what Muhammad said, okay? And the Sirah is the biography of his life. And it's important to study those because we know far more about Muhammad than we will ever know about Jesus. Far more. We know Muslims have wrote down how Muhammad lived day by day, intimate details of what he did with his 11 wives. All right? Yes, that's right. We know if he ate with his right hand or his left hand. We know how he prayed. We know how he washed. We know everything about him. Muslims found it important to note this down for a very valid reason, because Allah in the Quran commands Muslims 91 times to obey and follow in the example of Muhammad. Okay, so just like Christians are supposed to obey and follow in the example of Christ, Muslims are supposed to obey and follow in the example of Muhammad. All right, so a few things of what Muhammad did, I can go over right here real quick. Quran chapter 4, verse 34 talks about beating, strike them. Talks about beating the females in the family or your wives until they are obedient to you. Sorry, I'm going to have to flip through this real quick. But if you leave me your email, I will email you a link to the presentation. Quran chapter 33, verse 59 talks about the reason for the hijab is so that Muslim women will be known and not abused. A Muslim woman wears the hijab to obey Allah, to make sure that Muslim men know that she's a Muslim woman, because it is not permitted. It is haram. Okay? Haram is not permitted, forbidden, for Muslim men to sexually harass or physically harass Muslim women. They wear the hijab so that they know, because non-Muslim women, it is allowed. All right, Quran chapter 2, verse 82. Two witnesses, the witness of two men is equal, the witness of two women is equal to the witness of one man. A woman has half a witness. So as a 10-year-old, I was wondering why my dad didn't do anything about the abuse that I went through, why he didn't stop it. And one of the reasons I think might be, I don't know, I haven't talked to him in years, one of the reasons might be that if he had actually taken me to a sheikh and said my brother sexually molested, raped my daughter several times, they would have checked, made sure I wasn't a virgin. So that checks out. The next part would be to call him, right? Did you do this? If he says no, which he probably would, guess who's going to get killed? That's right. Because as a female, my testimony is half that of a man. It's his word against mine. All right, Quran chapter 4, verse 24 talks about sex slavery. A lot of us have heard about ISIS and the sex slave markets that they still have to this day in the Middle East and North Africa, and that they actually have in the UK also. There are sex grooming gangs taking place that are ravishing through the United Kingdom. The Quran talks about having sexual relations with those your right hand possesses. There are rules for what you should do with your sex slaves. Muhammad himself had several sex slaves. One of them was Maria the Copt, who actually gave him his only son, who died as a child. So, if anybody tells you that ISIS is bringing it up out of their head, all you have to say is Muhammad did it first and he did it better. Quran chapter 65, verse 4 talks about marrying girls that are underage. Actually, it's a chapter about divorce. Okay, this verse is about divorce, and it talks about if a girl has not yet menstruated when you divorce her, she has to wait 3 months before she marries another man. Why? To make sure that she's not pregnant by you. This is the old way of making sure we know who your daddy is. Okay? Well, the question that comes in here is, if she hasn't menstruated when you divorced her, that means she didn't menstruate when you married her. She hadn't hit puberty when you had married her. right? So, when somebody says that marrying children in Islam is haram or forbidden, that is a total lie. Muhammad did it first and he did it best. Muhammad's favorite wife was 6-year-old Aisha, but Muslims will quickly step up and say, but he didn't consummate the marriage till she was 9. So, I guess it's okay. All right, Bukhari talks about Aisha in volume 5, book 58, number 236. You can Google all of this, folks. By the way, everything that I have up here is copied and pasted from Islamic websites because I want to be as fair as I possibly can. So this one talks about Aisha, his favorite wife. This one, Bukhari volume 7, book 72, hadith 777, talks about circumcision in Islam for girls and boys. Female genital mutilation. Is anybody familiar with it? Yeah, okay. Completely Islamic. Now, it's not to say that Islam invented it. It was a practice that was available before, but it permitted it. All right, women rulers. Muhammad said that a people who make a woman their ruler will never be successful. And over here, Bukhari volume 9, book 83, hadith 17, a Muslim who's admitted that there is no God but Allah and that I am his prophet may not be killed except for 3 reasons: a punishment for murder, for adultery, or for apostasy. So I'm a 10-year-old, I'm reading all of this, I'm literally getting physically sick, physically ill. I can't believe what I'm reading. I was taught in Islam Salam, Islam is peace. I was taught to die for Muhammad. That the whole reason for the misery of the Islamic world is the Jews and the Americans. I'm reading this and I can't tell you why, other than grace. I can't tell you why. I looked at this and I said, there is no way. There's no way that the God of the universe is this guy, right? But now, of course, I can't denounce Islam because I'll literally get killed. So what am I going to do? I took off the hijab. I stopped praying. Everybody laughed, haha. She got through a phase, and I went on with my life. Well, things changed when I was about 12 years old, 13 years old actually, probably. A lot of events happened in my life. And the most important one is that, well, let me precede this. In the Middle East, we're very spiritual people, okay? If you have a dream, you go to the older people in your home, whether it's your parents, grandparents, you tell them about your dream because certain things are bad news. For example, if you dream about owls, do not leave the house the next day. Lock your doors, shut your windows, stay in bed. Bad things will happen. Wolves are not good news either, just in case you're wondering. So I had a dream where I saw a man's face. And his face filled my entire vision. And there was light coming out from behind him and light coming out from his face. And I remember struggling, doing this, trying to get out from this light. Not because it wasn't beautiful, it was a gorgeous light. But the best way I can describe it is that it was like when you put rubbing alcohol on an open wound. You know it's good for you, but it still hurts and you want to move your hand away when you get a cut. That's what it felt like. So I woke up, I went to my dad. I said, Dad, this is what I dreamt of. I described the man. And my dad looked visibly upset. And I actually thought I was gonna get one of these, the back of the hand. But then he just kind of collected himself and said, oh, you saw Isa. Isa is the name for Jesus in Islam. And that means that you're gonna be a doctor. Yeah, that's what I said. Okay, I let it go, right? Not interested in ruffling feathers. Once my dad left the house, we had a couple of big dream explaining books at home, all right? I went and I hid the books, and I couldn't find anything in reference to that. So I let it go. Well, a few years later, my dad wants to bring us from the Middle East to Canada. Now, you can imagine my joy. The last time I remember being a human being was when I was in the West, when I was back home in the States. As soon as I heard him say that, I went to the map, I looked it up. Where's Canada? That's right on top of the States. Close enough. Let's go. So I did everything in my power to make sure that we went to Canada. By the time we actually took an airplane from Jordan to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and then from the Netherlands to Toronto. Now, something significant happened here. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother say the word no. Yeah, true story. Let me set the stage for you. We're in an airplane. There's all blue around us. You cannot see land for miles and miles. My mom takes off her hijab. Oh yeah. And she looks at my dad and she says, I don't pray. I don't fast. I'm done. I had never seen that before in my life. I was watching in shock. And for the first time, I saw my father helpless. He could not do a thing about it. I knew that if she had done this in the Middle East, it would have been her head, for sure. Because I had seen it happen before several times. I was well accustomed to it. Well, we got to Toronto. I was pretty happy. And in Toronto, I was able to actually, first I was in an Islamic school, and then I weaseled my way into a public school. And I did pretty well in my studies, but I quickly became acquainted with multiculturalism. I quickly understood the culture of diversity and acceptance and tolerance. And let me tell you, I am not a fan. Here's why. Because when we went to school with bruises and obvious signs of domestic violence, nobody sounded an alarm. Nobody said something. Had it been a white, black, Hispanic, anything other than a Muslim family, somebody would have sounded an alarm. But I learned quickly that I was a sacrificial lamb to the altar of acceptance to Islam. And it is very unfortunate and sad. Now, this was back in 2004 to 2006. Since then, things have only gotten worse in Canada, only gotten worse in the United States. The States is no better, all right? As a matter of fact, in 2006, I told my counselor about what was going on in my family in terms of abuse. She told Children's Aid. They came to the school. There's already more than enough evidence for it. They came to the school. They whisked us out. And my father got arrested twice. Both times got bailed out by his mosque. And I was really surprised because I had never... The guy who bailed him out was a Muslim guy that he was living with. And I'm like, I've never heard of this guy. But of course, anytime that you have a mosque, that is your center for Sharia. Sharia is Islamic law. It's very real. I unfortunately still live under Sharia because my dad went out of his way to go to the mosque and get a fatwa, which is a judgment on our lives for following Christ and for leaving